So I've made no bones about it in previous videos that I stand with Israel, but where does Russia stand? So it would be interesting to see what Russia says about the conflict in order to see how they're framing it or who they're standing beside, whether it's Israel or Palestine, why they're standing by either side, and what they have to say. I think this is a net victory for Russia in the sense that it's diffusing people's focus away from Ukraine and toward Israel. But it might be something that can be salvaged, although I'm watching for the propaganda value. What are Russian propagandists trying to get out of this? So with that in mind, we're going to look at the Russian Media Monitor. Special thanks to them for putting these videos together. We're going to walk through and periodically stop and talk about it. So here we go. Here's Solyov. Taliban called on Iran, Jordan, and Iraq to allow their forces to pass through into Israel to help Hamas take over Jerusalem. Well, that's inflammatory. At the same time, Israel's prime minister made a statement declaring the following: "We will avenge this black day. Any place Hamas deploys in this evil city, all the places Hamas is hiding, operating, we will turn into ruins. Residents of Gaza, get out now." Of course, you're aware of Hamas attack on Israel. The timing was perfectly chosen. The operation was perfectly prepared. Okay, so the first thing that strikes me is that this perfectly language sounds very much like everything's going according to plan, which loves to say about what's going on in Ukraine. So that's the first thing that raises some question marks in my mind. It shows that everyone who is supposed to know and understand how to ensure Israel's security and the country's defense capabilities have failed, politely speaking. They failed miserably. Okay, now one of the things that I think is happening here is that they enjoy talking about Israel's failure because the Russian army was supposed to be this big bad second army in the world kind of thing, and they kind of pants themselves in Ukraine. And I think that they're kind of trying to take Israel down a notch here. They failed miserably. This wasn't a terrible blow like this, maybe ever. This kind of prolonged slap. Turns out that not long ago, before these events, Israeli intelligence concluded nothing would happen, that all is well, despite the 50th anniversary. Well, they concluded that because Hamas was working really hard to deceive them, to trick them into thinking that they were preoccupied with domestic issues and that they weren't really interested in fighting with Israel, that maybe they had decided that they wanted to go a peaceful course, like the PLO, it appears to have gone in the West Bank. That's why they were deceived. Of the Yom Kippur War, they were preparing very thoroughly. It appears there were sleeper cells. They skillfully started in several places, and they really had to be backed by a foreign entity. They could not have, it doesn't seem, could not have done this on their own without the backing of a nation state, like Iran, and perhaps some help from Russia, but we'll cross that bridge only when we have facts that we can say that they've crossed that bridge and gotten help from Russia. If nothing else, Russia gets tremendous propaganda value if they can link weapons from Ukraine to what's gone on in Gaza and Israel. Okay, they skillfully started it in several places, attacking on land and by air as far as it's possible, using paragliders. They correctly calculated that since it's Saturday, many members of the security personnel and the military are observing Shabbat, and that's exactly right. They hit them on their holy day, and so people would be not near their phones, and it was a sucker punch. They don't use phones and spend the day in prayer. Many Israeli citizens, especially on the territory bordering Gaza, those settlements are deeply religious. They entered forcefully, brazenly, and extremely harshly. Countless missiles came crashing down on Israel. Okay, so far it does not sound like he's at all upset that Hamas did what Hamas did. Like, man, this is what they do. This is how you go take them. As opposed to, this was a barbaric, savage act that should not be tolerated in the civilized world. So he's already kind of leaning that way without even saying which side he's on. Countless missiles came crashing down on Israel. The strikes continue. Alarms are sounding at the Ben Gurion airport. Some strikes have reached Tel Aviv. With which side do our sympathies lie? Our sympathies are on the side of peace. No, they're clearly not, at least not in Ukraine. And here I don't think they're on the side of peace either in any meaningful way, but he's going to explain what he means here, and let's hear what he has to say. This was a smoldering conflict. It was unavoidable. Okay, so he's setting himself up to talk about the two-state solution and how Palestinians need their homeland too, and if you just had that, the Israelis would stop oppressing and such. Okay, it was obvious that sooner or later the situation would reach the point of an eruption. It's amazing that all of our impressions about Israel's superior defense capabilities, the might of its military and its equipment were completely shattered today. Now, their defense capabilities worked pretty well, but they were overwhelmed by 3,000 missiles. So that's a significant thing. They did not defend the Gaza Strip, the border around that, because they didn't have an inkling that this was going to happen and that this savage barbaric acts that they were going to be perpetrated on innocent civilians. Earlier, military experts mocked us for what happened near Kharkiv, but there is no comparison, to put it politely. Okay, so he is comparing this, and he is comparing how Russia's route was like Israel's route here in that first day. Of course, there are many difficult questions. Everyone is starting to recall Zhirinovsky's prophecies. You can't really argue. Just listen to this. These were your last elections. You won't have elections in 2024. A country by the name of Ukraine will no longer exist. You're not considering the situation in the Middle East. Events that will happen there will make everyone forget what Ukraine even is. And he's hoping, I'm sure, for that scenario. He's hoping that Ukraine is forgotten, Ukraine is ignored because of what's going on in the Middle East. I don't think that's going to happen. I think people that are focused on Israel are going to tie these two things together in their minds, because terrorism is happening to these two places. Okay, he says, continuing, he says, we're talking about World War III. Iran is not Vietnam, North Korea, or Kosovo. The most frightening events will take place. This is what Zhirinovsky said. Yakov Livosevich Kamedi is joining us. He's the former head of intelligence agency. He's currently in Israel. Now, when he has a guest on here who's currently in Israel from a defense agency, in the same way that other guests that he's had, like, who's he getting as a guest and why? Okay, let's hear what he has to say. Hamas skillfully prepared for this operation. I think they took no less than 1 year to prepare for it. It turns out our army wasn't prepared. What happened is much worse than what happened 50 years ago in the Yom Kippur Wars. There was information that 4 helicopters were downed. I look at the way the Israeli Special Forces are operating. It looks like they failed to learn from the special military operation. Now, he is kind of right about something, that the Hamas actually did learn a lot of lessons from what was going on in Ukraine, like using drones to take out certain targets and things like that. That's really interesting to see how they attacked the Israelis. Okay, they're moving forward as though nothing happened, as though there are no FPV drones. Guys, turn up the sound, says Solyov. United States stands with the state of Israel, says Biden, just as we have from the moment the U.S. became the first nation to recognize Israel, 11 minutes after its founding 75 years ago. And Solyov continues, and then he left silence. What do you think? Why did the Gramps step out? He says, talking about Biden. The Gramps step out to show that Americans and the U.S. support for Israel. He didn't say and couldn't say anything specific. This isn't their conflict. It's our problem, says the intelligence expert in Israel. And it is their problem. We will solve it. There's nothing for Americans to do. Even if we needed ammo, they don't have any. They don't even have enough ammo for Ukraine. Okay, so again, the guy that they've gotten as the security expert is just parroting Russian talking points about how the U.S. doesn't have any ammo, they can't support Ukraine, these kind of things. We'll solve this problem using our own capabilities. We don't need Americans for this. Of course, all this was superimposed on Putin's highly interesting statement in the Valdai and on Vladimir Vladimirovich's birthday. All of this is a distraction from important tendencies outlined in Putin's speech. I think the goals set by the political wing of Hamas have been fully accomplished. Hamas took took an enormous number of hostages. It delivered a very loud slap to Tel Aviv. Yeah, so the goals being accomplished, what? To kill civilians, to maim and injure individual citizens of Israel, not military necessarily, and to take hostages that they can kill and they can show on video that is that their goal? It delivered a very loud slap to Tel Aviv and can now calmly return to the boundaries of Gaza. If he thinks that they're going to calmly, that the Israelis are going, who have enshrined in their cultural identity an eye for an eye, are going to calmly let them go back to Gaza, he's got another thing coming. To fight from its usual positions. What did we see? Hamas, which doesn't have the might of the Israeli state in terms of its arms and equipment, having learned from the special military operation, there we have that same kind of language again, and we're going to see more talking points, was able to carry massive raid operations and pierce the esteemed Israeli defense like a knife. Because again, they're weighing in that Israel is a paper tiger. Right? They're taking him down a notch, just like Russia was taken down for real a notch. It seems like the Western world brought this on itself. Another Russian talking point, anti-Israel talking point. It's impossible to give a clear assessment of either side. We have no friends over there, so to speak. This is Middle Eastern colossus with a feet of clay, talking about Israel. In terms of a region, the Israeli army and its security system is considered the strongest one there. As it turned out, the Islamic resistance movement is able to execute such raids. I very carefully examined video recordings that illustrate the actions of Hamas fighters, of course, compared to the special military operation. All of this is meager. This event is like a puppet show. Okay, so what's, the Russians are doing, that's really powerful. What Israel did, they're really weaklings, and that's where he's going with this. Despite the large number of victims, it should be noted that Hamas fighters are acting with impunity, and the Israeli army obviously slept through this attack. Well, they're not sleeping now, and what's about to happen is going to be terrible for those living in Gaza. Hamas set up its info-psychological ops quite well. Their every step on the ground was accompanied by a massive and very successful propaganda campaign and an info-psychological campaign. Its propaganda campaign was aimed at the Arab world, and its info-psychological campaign was directed against Israel's civilian population. All of it brought together the results. Hamas realized absolutely all of its plans to completion. Here's a successful strike on a tank, and we're not going to show that, with our good old RPG-7. There you go. Soviet arms are quite sufficient. Again, this is all propaganda for pro-Russia, whatever, while they're kind of tearing down Israel and kind of not saying anything bad about what Hamas did, just saying, see how successful Hamas has been. They're cutting through their defenses like a knife. Okay, I think that's all that we need to see. You get a sense of which side Russia comes down on. They're coming down on pro-Hamas. Israel is weak. Hamas is doing all these things. Look at the West. Look how weak they are, and all the Russian talking points sprinkled in. I think it's really telling to listen to what they seem to focus on to understand where Russia really stands on this matter. They're not pro-peace. They're actually trying to make some significant hay out of terrible events in Israel. Okay, tell me what you think. Tell me if I'm wrong or what you perceive. I'm looking forward to seeing it in your comments. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.